ESPN, the world's leader in motorsports coverage, presents Speed World. On the eve of the 76th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, welcome to 500 Preview. I'm Bob Jenkins from the Hall of Fame Museum on the grounds of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, along with Derek Daly, to take a look back at the month of May 1992 and to look forward to tomorrow's running of the greatest spectacle in racing. Derek, it was an exciting month. Lots of stories here this month.
It really was. Lots of stories. Records broken almost on a daily basis with these new engine, car and driver combinations, so lots to talk about.
There was also a three-time world champion that came to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Nelson Piquet, after not finding a competitive ride in Formula One, decided to come here and try the 2.5-mile oval. To begin the story of Nelson Piquet's assault on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, we go back to March of this year when he came here for a testing session, and there to greet him was his teammate, Gary Bettenhausen.
And this was very much a teacher and student relationship where Nelson, remember, he came from 3 World Championship successes, yet he comes to the Speedway, a totally new area, and he's quite willing to sit down and start off again at ground zero.
Gary has been the teacher for other drivers that came here for the first time, namely Emerson Fittipaldi. So Nelson Piquet went on the Speedway for the very first time, and within just a few laps, he seemed to be very comfortable in the car and was quite impressive in terms of speed.
Nelson's reputation in Formula One was that he was particularly good on high-speed circuits, so he didn't think the speed would be much of a problem. Running between the walls was what he would have to get used to.
This was opening day on May the 2nd, and Nelson Piquet was there to begin the attempt to reach speed to allow him to qualify for this year's 500-mile race.
And he was exceptional. No problem to get up to speed. But one thing I believe began to happen is the frustration of having to stop, particularly for yellow lights. And I think the yellow light when it came on at turn 4 maybe was a contributing factor to Nelson's terrible crash here on the Thursday of the opening week, which left him with terrible injuries that he will suffer from for the rest of his days.
Dr. Jerry Punch talked with Dr. Terry Trammell about the injury suffered by Nelson Piquet.
You were quoted as saying that's probably the most seriously injured lower extremities you've ever seen in Indianapolis.
I think that's fair to say. He had a great deal of bone loss in his left foot and ankle and a lot of soft tissue loss. But things looked pretty good this morning when we took him back to surgery. Things are clean, no sign of any infection, no necrotic tissue. So I think we're off in the right direction anyway.
Prognosis for rehabilitation, you've had a lot of experience at it, but then even some of the veterans say that's going to be tough.
He's going to be a year getting back on his feet, really. Certainly more surgery planned to cover the wounds and possibly some additional reconstructive things on his left foot in the future.
Quickly, any thoughts about reconstructing the front of the car, some possible meetings about making them safer for the foot area?
There's a lot of research going on right now that's very quantitative and analytical to try and come up with some real numbers about how strong they need to be and how not to transfer that injury to the torso and cause a more severe life-threatening injury.
Derek, Dr. Trammell talked about a stronger footbox area. Is this something we'll see in coming years?
Yes, I hope so, and I'm glad Dr. Terry Trammell is looking into this with his group, because I believe he can be very influential in this area. But I agree the footbox needs to be stronger, but I think one of the quickest and best ways to help protect the driver and his feet is to make sure that he can lift his legs right back past the last bulkhead, because I think that will be a big saving area.
By the way, Nelson Piquet is doing very well at Methodist Hospital. He has undergone many surgeries, including some skin grafts, but he's reported to be doing very well. Well, the 1991 champion of the Indianapolis 500, Rick Mears, had not tested the concrete walls at Indianapolis until last year. He had an incident with the wall for the first time in '91. He also had a major crash in 1992.
Wednesday of the first week saw Rick Mears have a mechanical failure. You can see moisture coming out of the side of the car, and Mears had a tremendous impact with the turn 2 wall, turns the car upside down, and was extremely fortunate to escape serious injury.
Now, as we'll see here in a replay in a moment, the crash isn't at the angle that Nelson Piquet's was. Nelson went in almost head first. This one was a little bit on the left front of the car, but it was enough to turn the car over on its side, and it slid down the backstretch for many feet. We were very concerned about the condition of Rick Mears, but he got out with just a broken bone in his foot and a sprained wrist. We talked to Rick Mears.
Had I have done something that I didn't realize, didn't know, had something happen that we can't figure out, then it would be a little more difficult to climb back in. But, you know, we know what happened. We had a broken water line, know what caused it. So, you know, it's really not that difficult to get back in the car because we know what the problem was. It's a little sore yet, but, you know, it's coming along. And basically, by it being the left foot instead of the right foot like last year, that should be a little bit better because it'd be a foot that I don't use, and or not as much anyway. So you don't have the G loading in the right foot. Last year, you were banging against the side of the car as you're holding the throttle down. This time, you know, it'll be the other way. So it'll be away from the side that's actually has the fracture. So it should be a lot better.
And of course, the photos made Sports Illustrated, and Rick found them very interesting. He's saying to himself, that was me?
Normally, a photograph like that would scare the daylights out of most normal people, but drivers' makeup is such that they can totally block out of their mind such an incident and just carry on just like a normal day.
Well, tragedy struck at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway just before the second weekend of time trials. A young Filipino driver, Jovi Marcelo, crashed in turn number 1 and died of the injuries.
This was a tragic situation. Now, some rookies do come here and sail through the orientation program and qualify for the race, but you must remember this is one of the most difficult, one of the most dangerous racetracks to come to as a rookie to try and make this great event.
Derek and I will continue our look at tomorrow's Indianapolis 500 in just a moment. Welcome back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum as we look at tomorrow's 76th running of the Indianapolis 500. There weren't any rule changes over this past year to account for the increase in speed that we saw at Indianapolis this year, but indeed there was an increase, and Derek Daly looks at one reason.
Roberto Guerrero's pole position speed was over 7 miles an hour faster than Emerson Fittipaldi's record of 2 years ago, and that was actually the third largest speed increase in the history of qualifying at the Speedway. Well, why the sudden increase in speed? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is horsepower, and two is aerodynamics. Let's take a look at the 91 Lola Chevrolet. Now, this was one of the best cars you could have had at the Speedway last year. But look at the engine cowling here, the physical size of it. It's very big and it's wide because it has to cover the size of the Chevrolet engine. Now, what Ford did is they designed a much smaller engine. Let's take a look at the graphic package here. This is the old Cosworth DFS engine. Now, let's overlay the new Ford engine. Now, see how much smaller this new engine package is? What this translates into is this design of Ford car here, the 92. Advantage number 1, the engine is physically smaller, therefore the tunnels are bigger and wider underneath. More downforce, that's an advantage. Move up here. The top of the engine is smaller, therefore the bodywork can be lower and it's tucked in a lot more. That gives it less drag, advantage number 2. And then we go to the Ford engine. It's got more horsepower. So there's 3 good reasons why this car package is a lot faster than some of the cars that were here last year. Now, the Buick is on the pole here. Their chassis is very good, but their big advantage is this unit here, the Buick V6. It develops tremendous horsepower because, remember, it's got 10 inches more turbocharger boost. That translates into about 80 horsepower more than everybody else. Now, another engine we haven't mentioned yet is the Chevrolet B version. Penske's are using it. It has some of the advantages of the Ford engine, but they have yet to realize the full speed potential.
There's no substitute for horsepower, and when you have, you know, I mean, I'd fight for a half-inch of boost, which is probably, you know, 6 horsepower. And when somebody has 75 to 100 on you, you know, that's tough to fight. But along with that, you know, you've got to have the reliability. To make horsepower, it takes fuel. So I think the race will be a little bit more even, you know, a little more level playing field than qualifying.
Well, we heard Rick Mears say that he thinks there'll be a much more level playing field for the race. Do you believe that?
Well, I think that may be the political answer at the moment. I haven't seen any real reason why this Penske is suddenly going to rise to the top on race day. I think this car is not what they had hoped it was going to be when they came here, and I think Mears will have to do one of his normal Indy 500 race days and chase the car on a regular basis at the pit stops. And he was successful last year, but there's a lot more faster cars to be raced against this year.
We'll see in about 24 hours. Now, we mentioned the Buicks, we mentioned the new Chevy engines, but if there was any surprise in my estimation this month of May, it was the performance of the Ford Cosworth engines. Back in 1965 at the Indianapolis 500, Jimmy Clark, who came here from Doon, Scotland, in a Lotus powered by Ford. So Ford was involved in the Indianapolis 500 even back in the mid-60s.
And the name of Jim Clark, still one of those magical names around the world, even though he only came here a couple of times.
Michael Krenefis is Ford's Director of Special Vehicle Operations, and we asked him if he was happy with the performance of the new Ford Cosworth.
First time here, we're very happy. I mean, all 4 cars are going quick, and Michael was just sensational all by himself. 231, that's, I mean, what more can we say? We hope we're going to be qualifying well. We'll see how we do in the race.
Well, Mario Andretti during practice was up to over 233 miles an hour, so we saw then that the car did have a lot of power. Ari Lyondike, another one of the drivers with the new Ford Cosworth power. We talked to Mario Andretti about the new engine and chassis package.
What's playing is the engine and the chassis together. I think is the package that's really working for us pretty good. So the engine is certainly doing its job, and because of its physical size, that we're able to do the chassis a little bit smaller, a little more efficient, and I think we have a little bit of an advantage against some of the others.
The ceremonial front row picture on the right is the Buick on the pole, but then Eddie Cheever in the middle in a Ford and Mario Andretti on the outside in a Ford. Now, they put in a lot of laps on this engine, and we asked Mario, what were they working on so many laps?
Well, we're working on the fuel pickup, you know, in the tanks. We're working on some electronics and some, you know, a little bit of everything. There's always something that the information that you need. We're running full, we're running half, we're running empty.
And I guess the question is, Derek, will the Fords be reliable tomorrow?
Well, history puts the odds against them because never has a brand new engine come to a 500-mile race and won first time out. However, Ford have 4 very strong driver-car combinations. So if one of them does finish, they will be running very strongly at the end.
The Gallus-Craco team came to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1992 with a brand new chassis, the Galmer. The drivers, Al Unser Jr. and Danny Sullivan, have been very quiet this year.
This is the Chevrolet engine, the A version, which is used in the Gallus-Craco team. The chassis here is the Galmer car that they've designed and built themselves in Bicester in England. And there was a lot of question marks before this car came here as to just how good it would be. I think it surprised a lot of people, but they did spend a lot of time on the first week working on a lot of specifics. What did they learn?
Not much, really. We're doing our best to keep up with the Cosworths and Buicks, and you know, it's going to be a long race, so.
Little Al's teammate at the Indianapolis 500 this year is Danny Sullivan, and that team also worked a lot all month, but they were primarily concerned about not necessarily going fast for qualifying, but rather getting a good race day setup that would allow them to go the entire 500 miles.
We've had to work just on race strategy, just try to get a car so we can run it strong all day long. You know, those guys may take off at the beginning, and hopefully they're going to back up. It's a 500-mile race and not a mile shorter than that, so that's what we're going for.
This is something that Al Unser Jr. hopes happens only on a practice session here, not on race day. Rick Gallus said they came here just minding their own business, and they're really not going to concentrate on what other people are doing.
No, we don't worry about anybody else. You know, we just take care of our 2 guys, and we've been doing a lot of work on our race setups. Just want to get as far up as we can and go race them, you know, in a couple of weeks.
Derek, I think one of the big questions when they came here to the Speedway was, would the Galmer have enough straightaway speed to be competitive? And I think it's shown it has.
I think it has. There were definitely some doubts before this car came here. I think a lot of those doubts were answered. But one of the things Rick Gallus told me, they have so little information about this car on super speedways that this is going to be a huge learning curve for them on race day.
All right, how about the True Sports chassis, a new version of that this year?
And it should be better. I mean, they wanted the Chevrolet engine, now they have it. This is the year true sports have to be right on the pace, or a small team like this could end up with a major struggle on their hands to continue in business.
We're previewing the 1992 Indianapolis 500 on the eve of the greatest spectacle in racing, and we'll have more in just a moment. I'm Bob Jenkins along with Derek Daly, and we're at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum previewing tomorrow's 76th Indianapolis 500. It was a tough month for some drivers at the Speedway. The yellow light winked on many times for accidents.
The first crash of the month was on the first Sunday when Barbatza got into the wall on the outside of turn 1. This is one of Dennis McCormick's cars. Made heavy contact, a lot of damage. They did actually repair this car later on, and he did run it later in that same week.
Fabrizio Barbatza climbing out of that car uninjured. On Tuesday, it was Scott Brayton. We noticed smoke coming from the car as it went down the backstretch. And then as Brayton set the car into turn number 4, it got out from under him. He hit the wall outside of turn number 4.
I think Scott Brayton did recognize there was something wrong with this car. He had slowed up. He was actually trying to turn down into the pit lane, but the speed was still too high. The oil got on that right rear tire. We see another slow motion of it here. Heavy contact on the outside. A lot of damage. This is the Buick car. He did then drive the Chevrolet, but qualified later on in the Buick.
One of the most unusual incidents of the month, Buddy Lazier, and it happened at a very slow speed. He came very close to hitting Hiro Matsushita, and we'll see the slow motion of it, and you can see how close he came.
What happened is he jumped on the brake pedal. The bias was set way towards the back. You can see from the blue smoke the rear wheels are locked, and that was caused him to get so close to doing a lot of damage to Matsushita.
Then on Wednesday, it was Paul Tracy in a crash in turn number 1. This was one of the 92 Penske chassis. Tracy was okay. It virtually destroyed the car, however, and caused quite some concern among the Penske team concerning their amount of 1992 chassis. And then Kenji Momota.
One of our Japanese visitors loops it coming out of turn 4, hits very hard on the outside, took away some precious practice time, I believe, because again, he failed to qualify, having lost so much time in the first week.
The Friday before the first day of time trials, Gary Bettenhausen, a lot of smoke coming from the car into turn number 1, a mechanical failure, and into the wall.
Again, Gary B knew there was something wrong with this car. There was smoke and oil coming onto that right rear tire. He was turning down to the apron at turn 1 rather, but couldn't slow it down, lost it, and made heavy contact again with the outside wall. He was fine.
The first day of qualifying, Hiro Matsushita, the first Japanese driver in the 500 lineup last year. Hard contact with the wall, the car becoming airborne as it slid through the grass between turns 1 and 2. Now, Hiro Matsushita did suffer a broken leg and was unable to compete this year at the Indianapolis 500.
Then Tony Bettenhausen again had a mechanical failure. We can see the smoke came out of the right rear wheel. The gearbox seal broke, sent fluid onto that tire, and Tony Bettenhausen virtually destroyed this car, hitting the outside of the wall on turn 3.
And he was unable to get another car up to speed for the race. Fabrizio Barbatza, once again, he was the first to crash on Sunday, and again, this time making contact with the outer wall coming out of turn number 2. And at that point, it was agreed that Fabrizio would step out of this car.
So Fabrizio Barbatza vacates this car. Johnny Parsons took it over. Now here is a lucky moment coming up for Scott Pruitt. Between turns 1 and 2, Pruitt does a 360, doesn't hit anything. Very seldom you do that at the Speedway and get away with it.
Jeff Wood on Thursday, the second week of practice, spinning and making slight contact with the outer wall in turn number 4. Car wasn't badly damaged. He did make it back onto the racetrack by the second weekend of time trials.
One of the drivers who's had a very quiet month here, never got this car up to speed, and never made a legitimate attempt at qualifying. Pancho Carter was the last man to hit the wall here. This is one of Hemmelgarn's cars. Carter was late into it. Left front suspension broke, put him into the wall. He suffered a fracture of his right forearm.
Well, all kinds of things caused the crashes, but certainly we saw a lot of mechanical problems that caused some incidents this year.
That's right, and the concrete wall at a super speedway is one of the most unforgiving areas when you get in trouble in one of these Indy cars. Now, you did see, as you said, Bob, mechanical failure, particularly on engines, caused quite a few of these crashes. And in Pancho Carter's case, although we didn't see it all, it was actually a front suspension that failed on him.
Well, we had new 1- and 4-lap track records set during qualifying, and we'll take a look at Roberto Guerrero's record run when we come back with more Indy 500 preview. Monday, live at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, you'll have a chance to talk with the winner of the Indianapolis 500 on a special edition of Speed Week, a live call-in show at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Bob Jenkins, along with Derek Daly here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum Hall of Fame. We're previewing tomorrow's race. Well, when qualifying began, Derek, it seemed that Jim Crawford would perhaps have the best shot at the pole position, but instead it was his teammate, Roberto Guerrero.
That's right. Jim was very much the star of the opening week here, setting all sorts of records on almost on a daily basis. But Guerrero came through in the end, and I think he was a very popular pole position man, because remember, Guerrero's career got so sidetracked with a terrible crash here in testing in '87, and he almost got forgotten about.
Roberto Guerrero driving for the King Motorsports team owned by Kenny Bernstein. They have pretty much become the Buick factory team. A lot of testing miles on the car at the Speedway. Guerrero and his teammate Jim Crawford.
And Guerrero really getting a very big break in his career at a critical time in his career when he got the call from Kenny Bernstein. Right from his early test days over the winter and early year test sessions here, Guerrero was spectacular in this car and was the first man to lap 230 miles an hour in the off-season testing.
I think a lot of people felt that Jim Crawford would be the pole sitter for this year's race regarding how he had performed during the practice, but engine problems he experienced during the first day and second day of time trials, and so Guerrero had to carry the banner for King Motorsports. Guerrero set new 1- and 4-lap records with a new 4-lap average at 232.482 miles an hour.
Buick, a couple of years ago, went to Lola and said, we'd like a car specifically built around our engine. This is what the result was, a car that is spectacular, not easy to drive, but very comfortable to drive. We saw Guerrero and Crawford running in excess of 230 miles an hour without going near to the walls.
To the cheering throng, our Marty Reed talked with Roberto Guerrero after he made the record run at Indianapolis.
I don't want to get overexcited yet because there's still a few fast guys to run. So, but I mean, the Quaker State Buick worked beautifully. You know, we were a little nervous this morning with the setup, but it worked very well. And you know, I'm over the moon right now. I just hope it holds.
If it holds up, will you be able to live with the fact that Roberto Guerrero is the track record holder in qualifying?
That would be very, very nice. I would love that.
Well, of course, that run did hold up. Roberto will be starting from the pole position in tomorrow's race. Guerrero was the Rookie of the Year here in Indianapolis in 1984. This year, there are 7 rookies in the starting field. The rookies included Lynn St. James, the 3rd woman to try Indianapolis. Janet Guthrie was successful. Desiree Wilson was not. Lynn St. James became the 2nd woman to qualify at Indianapolis.
Really, by the end of rookie orientation, even on the first day of rookie orientation, I was not intimidated by the place. I mean, this is a piece of asphalt you gotta challenge and you gotta conquer, and that's what you gotta do. Now, there's the weather, all the things that affect the car and the game, the whole game of what this is. I'm not saying it's a piece of cake and it's easy. I'm just saying that intimidation hasn't been a problem that I've had to deal with.
And all the way from France, Philippe Gache came here as a rookie. Had very little experience in single-seater cars, but did an excellent job to qualify for the race.
Car owner Dale Coyne has 2 rookies in this year's Indianapolis 500. Eric Bachelard, the reigning Indy Lights champion, and Brian Bonner, who comes over from the IMSA ranks.
Now here's Ted Prappis. This was the spectacular run late on Sunday when he needed the speed and got it up above the 219 range and just delighted Bongo and the rest of the crew.
Eric Bachelard, we mentioned that he's one of the drivers for Dale Coyne. Bachelard with a fine performance of 221.549. For a time, he was the fastest rookie qualifier until the last day when Jimmy Vasser won that distinction. But we look for good things from Eric Bachelard.
Now here's the 7T car. This was the disaster left by Paul Tracy after that serious practice crash, and then he came back in his own number 7 to qualify at a 219.751 miles per hour. Excellent job by Paul Tracy.
Dale Coyne bought this car from Kenny Bernstein after the first week of time trials, and Brian Bonner from the IMSA ranks stepped into it, did a great job getting it into the race. He'll start in the middle of row number 9. He qualified it at 220.845. Well, 7 rookies in the field, and this is truly an international sweepstakes this year.
That's right. I think there are so many rookies because in the years past, they mainly came just from America. Now this is such a huge international event that the rookies now come from all over the world.
And it's going to be interesting to see on race morning how the command is given. With Lynn St. James in the starting lineup, we anticipate Mary Fendrick-Holman saying again, "Lady and gentlemen, start your engines." Back with more on 500 Preview after this. Welcome back to 500 Preview on the eve of the 76th running of the 500. Aerodynamics are built into race cars, and Gary Lee tells us that aerodynamics are also built into crash helmets.
The principle of designing an Indy car seems easy enough. You slice through the air so the wind traveling over the top to the rear wing creates some downforce on the wing, and also the air traveling under the car through the ground effects package creates the low pressure or the suction. Now, the application of that principle becomes a real challenge. The engineers know all about suspension geometry. They have that figured out to the fraction of an inch. But the real problem is getting the air smoothly over and around the cockpit to the rear wing. Therefore, the driver's helmet about right here becomes an integral part of the aerodynamics package.
It is actually quite a tricky area. It's very difficult to control the air over the car when the air is really basically going over a large hole, which obviously is the cockpit. And then through the roll hoop, which obviously is mandatory, it needs to be there. But then, of course, the other consideration is not so much how well the air flows over the car to the rear wing, is also the comfort of the driver.
When Ray Haroon won the first 500 in 1911, his headgear was state-of-the-art, a leather cap. It served to keep the hair out of the eyes and reduce noise. As the helmet evolved as protective headgear, the first full coverage model appeared in the early 50s, replacing the half-shell Cromwell. By 1968, Dan Gurney was the first to wear the modern-day full-face helmet, offering additional protection for the face and jaw. Now, with increased speeds, the drivers are complaining of helmet lift and buffeting.
Basically, what we're trying to do is stop that happening by doing quite tricky fill-in pieces, and then the rest of it is basically done by the different designs, the ripples on the helmet, and various things like that.
After we do our wind tunnel development in the areas that we think we need to work on to reduce lift by trip strips or buffeting by vortex generators, we pass that information along to teams and manufacturers like Olola, or teams that are building their own cars like Gallus Craco, and work with their aerodynamic engineers to make sure the design works.
Nigel Bennett, designer of the Penske cars, was instrumental in the design of the original Simpson Shark, which featured airflow vents to create negative vacuum and stall strips to stabilize the driver's head.
This is simply an add-on to the original Shark, and what it does is it stabilizes the head from moving laterally.
According to race car designers, the front wheels and driver's head represent the biggest areas of drag on an Indy car. Well, there's not much they can do with the front wheels, but much attention is being paid to the cockpit area.
We would like to really get more involved with it because the driver's head causes a significant drag, and if we can improve that, that's better straightaway speeds.
Derek, this is relatively something new. Even when you were here a few years ago, they didn't have aerodynamics built into the helmets.
That's right. Wind buffeting on the driver's head can be a major problem here. It can actually cause you to not be able to focus your vision properly. That's what the helmet manufacturers are trying to address with these new aerodynamic devices on the helmets.
Derek and I will be right back in a moment with more Indy 500 preview. We'll have a comment from Dave Despain on this month. Stay with us. From the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum, welcome back to Indy 500 Preview. Dave Despain anchored the qualification coverage here on ESPN, and he has some thoughts about the month of May 1992.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. What a month of May this has been. My notebook runneth over. If all else were equal, and I'll preface this by noting that all else is not equal, but if the crowds and if the speed and if the prize money were all the same, this would nonetheless be the greatest spectacle in racing purely on the basis of duration. It has been 22 days and a few hours now since the search for speed began, and we're still, what, 15 hours away from the green flag. To hold the attention of the world of motorsports for 3 full weeks takes an awful lot of spectacle. Now, I'll grant you a lot of that time has been spent frivolously, but hey, so what? Most of us get into this business because it's fun, right? Racing is supposed to be fun. This year, that search for speed was hugely successful. The pole up 7 miles an hour over the record. Is that a good thing? I don't necessarily think so. You see, as the speed goes up, so too does the cost. The cost both in terms of dollars and the human cost. This race and the series to which it lent its name is addicted to technology as surely as a street addict is hooked on crack. Few teams can afford that technology, and thus the annual struggle to fill the field. Here's a question for you. Do you think the fans would all still flock into this old speedway if the track wrote its own set of rules? And I'll just pull up an example. Let's say all the cars had to run Chevy V8 engines. And I'm talking about real Chevys, not the British Techno motor with Chevy on the valve cover. And what if Tony George, the president of this place, said that those engines had to ride in a chassis with a big blunt nose as strong and formidable as that on the Endeavour spacecraft? A nose that might mess up the aerodynamics of the cars a bit, slow them down to, what, 215? Would the fans and the TV cameras and the sponsors still come? Well, you bet they would. And with a nose like that on the car, crashes like this might not cripple the likes of 3-time world champion Nelson Piquet, whose attempt to race at Indy has cost him his career. The uninformed will inevitably link the death of Jovi Marcello to the headlines regarding speed, and that ignores the fact that Jovi's crash occurred not at 235 miles per hour, but at 175. That death, the first of a driver in 10 years at this track, proves to us that in racing there is always a danger, regardless of speed. But tonight, the eve of the big race, is not necessarily the time to stand on the soapbox. For in fact, there are too many great stories to savor as we await the fall of the green flag tomorrow. For example, Eddie Cheever is still smarting from the criticism he got from Mario Andretti after they collided on the first lap at Long Beach. Mario is going to start right alongside Eddie in row 1 tomorrow. I'll hold my breath during the charge to turn 1. I wonder how Roger Penske's perennial powerhouse is going to fare tomorrow. A practice crash for rookie driver Paul Tracy knocked the team off stride. Rick Mears' devastating wall smash put them in a deep hole. I thought Rick's 9th place qualifying effort 3 days later was the most heroic run of the month. But Penske's men will play catch-up tomorrow. The favorite has become the underdog, and that is always the best test of team mettle. Don't bet against them on race day. In contrast, Chip Ganassi's 2-man squad of Cheever and Ari Luyendyk is the success story of the month. In only its 4th race, the new Ford Cosworth XB owns 4 of the top 6 qualifying spots. Carl Haas drivers Mario and Michael Andretti rounding out that quartet. But it is Ganassi, adequate as a race driver, who has become an emerging power among the owners. Potential winner tomorrow, promoter of the recently announced New York street race. This is a man prepared to deal with Penske and Haas as equals. When the green flag falls tomorrow, millions of women who might otherwise ignore the 500 will instead cheer for Lynn St. James, 2nd woman ever to make the field. Her role as a spokesperson for our sport is every bit as impressive as her driving. And finally, the sense of history permeating row 8. A.J. Foyt back for his 35th straight. I don't know if he's ever going to quit. And Al Unser Sr. is right alongside. 8 500 victories between them. Might one pull off the unprecedented 5th win here. But ultimately, Bob, I think the best measure of spectacle is one simple fact. This, the largest sporting event in the world, seats approximately 250,000 people. The last of those seats was sold last June. There is only one event in the world that can make that claim, and that event is truly the greatest spectacle in racing. I can't wait for the green flag. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Dave. Well, Derek and I will be back to take a look at the 1991 Indianapolis 500 next on Indy 500 Preview. From the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum Hall of Fame, I'm Bob Jenkins along with Derek Daly. We're previewing tomorrow's Indianapolis 500, and we anticipate a great race tomorrow, but hey, last year's wasn't bad.
Oh, it was a great one, and for a long time, most of the day, it looked like Michael Andretti might drive into victory lane. But Rick Mears, who changed his car almost every pit stop, was spectacular towards the end and made a great finish.
Back home again in Indiana, and it seems that I can see how I long for my Indiana home.
So Rick Mears joined A.J. Foyt and Al Unser as a four-time winner of the Indy 500. Will it be number 5 tomorrow? We'll take a look at the starting lineup for the 76th running of the 500 right after this. Welcome back to Indy 500 Preview. I'm Bob Jenkins along with Derek Daly. And now let's take a look at the chosen 33, the drivers who will start tomorrow's Indy 500.
Very much the star of the show in qualifying, Roberto Guerrero at a new track record of 232.482 miles an hour starts on the pole. Middle of the front row, the first Ford car, Eddie Cheever. He was the star of Sunday's qualifying. And outside the second Ford, Mario Andretti.
Going to row number 2, the 1990 winner, Arie Luyendyk. In the middle, a crowd favorite to win this event, Gary Bettenhausen. And Michael Andretti, second place finisher here at Indy last year.
Row 3, inside, Scott Brayton. He qualified the Buick. Then the quickest Chevrolet runner, Danny Sullivan in the Galmer Chevrolet. And on the outside of row 3 is Rick Mears.
2 former winners are in row number 4. On the inside, the Miller Genuine Draft Lola driven by Bobby Rahal. Emerson Fittipaldi, the '89 champion, has the middle of that 4th row. And to the outside, the new Galmer driven by Al Unser Jr.
Row 5, inside, Stan Fox making his first appearance in Indy cars this year. John Andretti in the Pennzoil cars in the middle. And then a very good job by Eric Bachelard outside row 5.
The 6th row consists of Philip Gosch, driving car number 44, his qualifying performance 221.4. Scott Pruitt in that True Sports chassis occupies the middle of row number 6. And then another outstanding qualifying performance by John Paul Jr. This is a 1990 chassis, but John Paul Jr. qualified it at 220.244.
Row 7 on the inside, Penske's rising star of the future, Canadian Paul Tracy. Middle of row 7, Jeff Andretti driving one of A.J. Foyt's cars. And then the star of winter testing and the first week's running here, Jim Crawford at a 228.8. Jim did not get a realistic chance of running for the pole, though.
Row number 8, and this is the row you might want to watch when they drop the green flag. 2 former winners, 8 500 victories between them. Al Unser Sr. on the inside of row number 8, driving a Buick-powered car, qualifying at 223.7. Then it's A.J. Foyt in the Copenhagen Racing Lola, qualifying at 222.7. And Buddy Lazier, he is in his second Indianapolis 500 on the outside of the 8th row.
Row 9, Raul Boesel. He came here with nothing to do and took over for Hiro Matsushita after his crash in the Panasonic Lola. Brian Bonner, a rookie in the middle of row 9, and on the outside, history-making Lynn St. James.
In row number 10, Jimmy Vasser went from the slowest qualifier to being bumped to being the fastest rookie qualifier in the matter of just a few moments. Last weekend during qualifying, he starts in 28th position. Dominic Dobson will begin from 29th, and on the outside of row number 10, former winner Tom Sneva, qualifying at 219.7.
And the final row, row 11, Gordon Johncock, 2-time winner, finally got up to speed when it counted on Sunday evening. Then Mr. Excitement on the final day of qualifying, Ted Prappis and Scott Goodyear, who actually qualified at a 221.8, but elected to change cars and start in the car that Mike Groff qualified.
That's the starting lineup for tomorrow's race. Derek and I will be joined by Gary Lee in just a moment, and we'll tell you who we think is going to win tomorrow's race. We are back at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum, and we've been joined by Gary Lee, and now it's time for us to tell you who we think is going to win tomorrow's Indianapolis 500. I think Bobby Rahal is going to win, but Gary, since you're the new kid on the block, who do you think is going to win?
Well, I like Guerrero and I like Luyendyk, but there's that reliability question on the Buick and the Ford Cosworth, so how about a proven winner, a Lola Chevy and Bobby Rahal?
Derek?
Well, I think you've obviously been listening to some of the things I've been saying when I picked Rahal in the past. I think Rahal is becoming one of the favorites definitely for this race because it's so difficult to win this race with outright speed. So I'll pick Rahal also, but if I was to pick a Ford car, I'll pick Luyendyk.
Well, I was the first to predict Bobby Rahal way back in April, but my second choice would be Michael Andretti. If the Fords hang in there, I think Michael's going to be very tough. All we hope is that it's a very safe race tomorrow at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Thanks for joining us on Indy 500 Preview. For Gary Lee and Derek Daly, I'm Bob Jenkins. So long, everyone.